Hello, just adjusting my camera focus. Today, I'm just talking briefly about the nodes in Western astrology, how they're overlooked, they're understated, and how we should pay more attention to them, and some advice on how to actually do that. Um, in ways other than booking a reading with me, which obviously you can do anytime by visiting my website, overthoughtandunderstated.com. Anyway, so the nodes are a major orienting factor for the character, for the overall personality in Vedic astrology, but they tend to not carry as much significance in Western styles of astrology. And the first thing I'll say to that is that that's a massive mistake. The nodes are objective points in space. They are what they are, and they carry the same amount of significance regardless of which system you're using. Okay. It has nothing to do with sidereal versus tropical. Tropical is superior, and it doesn't matter. I'm not making a claim about Vedic astrology, by the way, to equate the sidereal calculation of the zodiac with Vedic astrology as an ancient and sacred practice is a massive mistake. Okay. In fact, Victor Kara has unpacked why the tropical zodiac is the one true zodiac, especially in Vedic culture, with a basis in Vedic ancient texts. And I recommend his channel for understanding why that is the case, why the tropical zodiac is superior. Okay. But just because your nodes may be in one sign in tropical and another sign in sidereal, and just because Vedic astrologers over the last 2,000 years have mistakenly been using the sidereal zodiac, it doesn't mean that the nodes carry any more weight in your Vedic chart versus your Western chart. In fact, that has a disagreement underlying it as well. Okay, it comes down to the discussion about how to calculate a chart, and that's about the zodiac system that you're using, which has nothing to do with Western or Eastern. It's just that people in the East and in Vedic culture have been trapped into using the sidereal zodiac because that's just what they do, right? That's how any tradition works. People continue to do it, not because it's true, not because it's correct, but because that is what people do. And that's what's happened in Vedic culture. And because of that, a lot of actual Vedic essence in Indian culture has been lost. And so when you go to India today, what you get is not really Vedic culture. It's just Indian culture with a bunch of influence from the West, having been a British colony and having all this access to technology from the United States. Okay, so like there's no country in the world that on its own is just enlightened. All right. Enlightenment happens one by one, by you studying your chart, by you being like finding out what it means on your life's journey to be the most authentic version of yourself possible and learning how to manage that. That's what enlightenment means, more or less. Okay. But there is a point in your life, if you're doing life right, that has to do with the nodes in astrology. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is that signs are of secondary importance in astrology. This is another massive mistake perpetuated by pop astrology in the West. Okay. Signs are about style of expression, swagger. Okay. There are much more important parts to your chart to describe your character and your journey and where you're headed and what you should do and not do other than signs. Okay. So in the West, it's no mistake that we place this overemphasis on signs, because what do we do in the West? What do we care about? What do we value? Style, expression, swagger. That's what signs are. It's important. Okay. but it's not the end all be all. House placements of your planets are more important than signs. Aspects are more important than signs. Okay. I'll go toe to toe with anyone about this. Bit of advice, don't try me. All right. So anyway, the nodes. I will say that Vedic astrologers get one thing right, despite the fact that they've been using the wrong zodiac for 2,000 years, that the nodes are of massive importance, and they are orienting factors for your character and your journey through life. Okay. It's the only example that we have in the birth chart, especially if you've watched my last video on the 12th house. It's the only clear example that we have of true polarity in our characters, in our beings, and in reality. Even though everything has a polar opposite in a birth chart, opposite signs, opposite houses, the 12th house is the factor that shows us that actually polarity is a myth. It's useful, but it's not true with a capital T. Polarity does not exist. We create conceptions in our mind, okay? As soon as we use a word, come up with a concept, we immediately create a second category that involves everything that does not fit into that category or that concept that we created. Therefore, it is a product of the intellect that we think that everything has an opposite and equal reaction. That is absolutely false. Okay, everything is one thing. The word everything implies one. Every thing, one. Okay, the concept of the one and the many in Western philosophy is a mistake. Let me explain this to you. By use of my dry erase board that I'm pulling out of the depth. Okay, can't. All right, like this. One versus many equals one with a capital O and one with a lowercase o. Anytime we put a capital letter on a word, whether it's one or truth or love or mind or self, it's referring to a universal. Okay. Which is something that everyone shares because it's a part of us and we are a part of it. It's a universal concept. It's depending on which word we use, whether it's one or mind or love or whatever. It doesn't point to anything that's different from any other word that we would capitalize the first letter with. It just points to a different manifestation, a different form of the same thing. You know, like how Christians say that the Trinity exists. There's God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And they form the perfect unity of a triangle where everything is nice and, you know, buttressed. Like when you put a certain amount of pressure on one point of the triangle, it puts equal pressure on the other points. So in sacred geometry, the triangle is the strongest, most foundational shape, right? And that's why the triangle is utilized in engineering, because that concept is applied to support beams in a building that you're building. But the Trinity itself is one thing. Okay, that's what Christians don't understand. And that one thing is actually God with a capital G. We can say We can say Father with a capital F and Jesus with a capital J and Spirit with a capital S. But those things, in terms of the Trinity, are still combining in a triangle to form one thing. And that thing actually is God, or I would say truth with a capital T, or strength with a capital S. I don't give a shit. Okay. What I'm saying is that everything is one thing, and not two things, but three things. Because everything that is real has infinite strength and sustainability to it as intrinsic to its structure. So the Trinity has to be a three-part concept in order for it to represent God itself, God himself, or truth itself, with a capital T or G, depending on whether you like to personify truth or not. That's really up to you, you know. But truth with a capital T is the ultimate authority. God with a capital G is our personification of truth with a capital T. Does that make sense? So anyway, the nodal axis is relative. It's a dual axis, okay? It's relative to us as individuals. And that's why, in some sense, it's not real. Because it's dualistic. It's the only point in an astrological chart that shows a perfect duality, okay? If your south node is on the 3rd degree of Leo, your north node is going to be on the 3rd degree of Aquarius every single time. So these are objective points in space. It's where the sun and the moon's ecliptics meet at the two different points, ascending and descending, north, south, accordingly, from our perspective here on Earth. Okay, that's astronomically what they mean. What they represent in astrology in your chart, they are orientating factors for your life path. Okay, now some pop astrologer chick on YouTube who has a crystal on her forehead and says, yeah, the North Node represents your soul's purpose. Okay, let's talk about Venus and aspect to it. What did you gain from that? That was not an explanation. Soul's purpose, that's what we hear. Okay, no, the Vedic astrologers figured out that it orients your entire life path. They talk about South Node being where you're coming from. So in a past life and the baggage you bring into this life that you're burdened to correct. North Node is the direction that you are headed. Okay. And it's important regardless of the system you're using, regardless of like what you're actually doing with astrology. Again, objective points in space. The only polar aspect to your chart, and I call it an aspect intentionally because it is an opposition, and it shows the power of the opposition in the birth chart. That if one sign or one house isn't getting enough conscious attention and its opposite is getting a whole lot of attention, like if you have a stellium in one sign in one house, its opposites can unconsciously manifest. Not only that, but the dark elements of that sign in that house will unconsciously manifest because you're not paying attention to that which is serving as a perfect complement for that place where you have all that conscious energy. Does that make sense? So oppositions are hugely important when it comes to finding balance in life. So that's what an opposition is, 180 degrees relationship between two planets or 2 points on the chart. And perfect balance and perfect complementary energies manifest from an opposition being solved and being dealt with. And that's what the North Node, as a permanent set of points, provides to our soul. Okay. South Node is where you're coming from. North Node is where you're headed. So it will take an indeterminate amount of time for you to figure out where you're coming from. And you must do that. You must get in touch with your soul's origin and the baggage that you're carrying into this life. Look, the Vedic astrologers talk about past lives. with regard to the South Node, it's the karma you've built up that you have to deal with in this life in order to make the transition to the North Node purpose in this life and orient yourself in a proper way. Okay, I don't like to talk about the past life, future life lingo, because I think it's confusing for people with Western minds. I think it adds a degree of woo-woo to the practice of astrology that is not helpful. Okay. Although I will say Stephen Forrest, great astrologer, all right, evolutionary astrologer. I've read a couple of his books. I've taken a couple of his classes. I do recommend him if you want to get a sense for the nodes and what they represent, and you don't mind that past life, future life kind of talk. That's what he uses to describe that. He uses narratives. What he does when he does a chart reading is he's using the nodes as overall points of reference for your soul's journey. And he's constructing a narrative about where you're coming from and where you're going based on the condition of the nodal placements, the aspects to it. The harder the aspects are, the more difficult your past was. The easier the aspects are, or the fewer the aspects are, generally speaking, the easier it is for you to get over that baggage and move on to the next thing, which is the North Node. Okay. So there's a certain point in your life where you switch from South Node, your soul switches from South Node focus to North Node focus. I can't tell you exactly when that's going to be without looking at your chart. Okay. And I can only give you so many tools for figuring that out on your own. But I will say this. Okay. The South Node has a square to it. The North Node has a square to it. All right. And that planet that's square to your North and South Node is the apex of a T-square between your nodes. So it's that planet that shows you where you need boundaries. It's that planet that shows you where the roadblocks are to getting toward actually being able to move forward in life. And it's that planet that's going to provide you with the challenges that you're going to have to deal with and maintain your self-authority against over the course of your life, whether you're dealing with your South Node stuff or you're moving toward your North Node stuff. Does that make sense? So there's a point in your life where you switch from South Node obsession and usually unconscious activity, maybe some bad relationships, maybe, just like whatever's difficult for you is connected to your South Node in the first part of life, whether it's the first half or less than that or more than that, depends on other factors. Okay. The more hard aspects you have, oppositions, squares. Get into secondary aspects as well, semi-sextiles, semi-squares, slightly negative or hard. Secondary aspects, minor aspects. That's going to determine how much time, roughly speaking, it's going to take for you to work through your South Node stuff. Okay. Which is where you're coming from. Stephen Forrest likes to construct a story, a narrative about your past life or lives in order to help you make sense of where you are today and how you need to correct certain things South Node wise to orient yourself toward North Node things and your purpose. I tend to gravitate away from fiction and narratives like that. Okay, I'm just saying that there are like clear, logical ways of interpreting what your South Node is saying and the kinds of things that you need to deal with before you can figure out what your purpose is. And there's a threshold that you cross at some point in life. If you have a lot of hard aspects to your nodes, it's going to take longer. It's going to be a more difficult path. If you have a less aspected nodal axis, fewer aspects to no aspects, which is actually quite rare. You may be kind of just floating. Like you may be acting well or according to your intuition, but you may just kind of be wandering aimlessly. And so crossing that threshold doesn't necessarily involve like a hard set of experiences or a singular significant experience that pushes you over that threshold. But once you cross that threshold, that's when you're like, ooh, okay, I've kind of figured out this life thing. Sweet. Like I know where I'm going and I'm not questioning where I'm going anymore. All right. That is the feeling of crossing the threshold from South Node and having dealt with that to North Node and being able to actually see the opportunities that present themselves that will continue to contribute toward your purpose and toward where you're meant to go in this life or in life, not just this life. This is the only life you got. All right. YOLO, Western term, you only live once. Vedic astrologers would debate that to no end, but I'm not going to enter that debate. Doesn't matter. We can't know. Metaphysically speaking, I'm not worrying about that argument. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you what the nodes mean, regardless of the system that you use. The nodal placements and their conditions describe South Node, where you're coming from and what you have to get over, what you have to work through in order to actually not just pursue what is good for you and what your purpose is, but to even see it. It's a polarity, okay, which means it's totally subjective. No one else has this path. You have this path. You have a particular degree of a house and a sign that your nodes are on. Okay. You have particular aspects, connections from other planets, which represent other parts of yourself that are contributing to your path or holding you back. It is very unique to you. And also, you're situated in a unique context in life. No one has your life, you know? Yes, they say that identical twins who are born 5 minutes apart end up having more in common than not, even if they're raised in different geographical places and different cultures, right? That's just on a baseline personality level, but you still have free will. You still have to contend with the conditions of your everyday life and make willful decisions. So are you managing your birth chart and how you are, your innate proclivities, predispositions, and inclinations well? Or are you acting against them more often than not, suppressing your authenticity and your self-authority? Okay. That depends on the environment that you're brought up in and how much willpower your soul has. You have to willfully work on yourself, which means that the transition from South Node to North Node in your life is a conscious one. You have to be conscious. Like you'll have a bad experience, like a catastrophic experience in your life that will pull you out of your unconscious mode of being and into, oh shit, I've got to work on my South Node stuff so that I can find my purpose. What doesn't happen is some shit goes down, you experience it, and you're like, oh, I understand the meaning of life now. No. Experience gives you orienting opportunity to willfully take the reins of your life. It gives you insight on how to become more self-aware. Experiences do. Every experience that you have in life is an opportunity to become more self-aware and to not repeat that fucking mistake again. Everything that you perceive as bad that happens to you is your fucking problem. You can trace that back that phenomenon back to a decision that you made that you were unconscious about or wrongly conscious about. Okay. Once you cross the threshold of south node to north node, that's not a problem for you anymore. You understand what good judgment means. You figure it out. Figure out what's going to serve you. And you figured out what's going to serve you because you found your place in and amongst society and other people. And you serving your purpose is also going to serve everyone else if it's the right purpose. If you think that you're on a truth path, okay, path to self-awareness, you think that you're doing the right thing, but other people aren't benefiting from it at all. And I don't mean just in a tangible way. I mean, in like, do you bring light to people? If the answer is no, then you might be a narcissist. At the very least, you're mistaken. You found something that feels good. You just found a new context for comfort. So working through your nodal conflict, opposition is not about comfort. Okay. There's an infinite myriad of ways that this can show up in your birth chart. And this is what astrologers are for. It's to help you unpack your soul's orientation and how it is that your personality is actually holding you back from expressing your true personality. Right? Someone who's like living out their birth chart seamlessly, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. It was a good thing for Michael Jordan. You look at that dude's birth chart and his transits, and like he lived his purpose, and it was a good thing. But guess what? So did Hitler. Look at that dude's birth chart. He lived his purpose. He just didn't use it for good. Okay, so orienting yourself in a nodal, on your nodal axis, is about cultivating your moral character, because it provides the perfect balance, opposition, balance, 180-degree axis. It's the perfect balance of you and the world. So our birth chart is an entity unto itself, just as we are. It happened at the time of our birth. Okay. We were born when we were born for a reason. So deal with it. Work on your notes. So that's just a little preliminary rant on what the nodes are really about. And trying to actually shed some light on how complex it actually is, because it is different from everyone. Again, some crystal four-headed bitch on YouTube who's like a pseudo, Vedic astrologer or something is not gonna help you by simply saying it's your soul's purpose. Let's talk about Venus. All right. It's part of your path. It's your orienting compass for your path. That's what the nodal axis is. It shows you, in a sense, direct south node to direct north node. It's the sun and the moon's ecliptics, the 2 points that they meet at on those two planets' journeys around the Earth. So from our perspective here on Earth, because everything in astrology is geocentric. Okay. So what does the sun and the moon represent? It's, in one sense, the father and the mother, masculinity, femininity. In another sense, it's a sense of self and authority versus like emotionality. It's exaltation, sun, versus contemplation, moon. It's the two most major points of your chart on a personality level, right? The nodes aren't really about your personality. They're about your journey, your direction, your personal compass, even within the context of your chart, within the context of your personality, your inclinations that you were born with, your perceptions that you were born with. it's a directional compass. It's a tool. Okay. Once you figure out where south is and where true north is, you can head north. And again, it's not a direct linear path. It's you're gonna have to traverse up the mountain. You're gonna have to, bust through a few brick walls and bad relationships and difficult orientations that we're all burdened with to one degree or another. Especially if you're still closer to the south node than north node. Okay. But as long as you're heading in the direction of the north node, that implies that you have worked through your south node stuff enough to be able to see where true north is, where the sun and the moon's ecliptics are meeting and ascending. That's where you have to go. Even two people born on the same day, they're going to have different rising signs, different degrees of their rising sign, even if it's the same one. So there's going to be a slight difference in where their nodes show up, as well as where all of the planets show up, degree wise on that axis. So, and the aspects to it. So again, preliminary rant on what the nodes are about and why they're important, regardless, even if you're using Western astrology, doesn't change the fact that the nodes are extremely important. Okay, so thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one. Cheers.